My name is Alina Whitaker, and I was 69 years old the afternoon I realized my own family might be planning something against me. It happened during a quiet Sunday lunch at my son's house. For years, Sunday lunch had been a tradition in our family. My late husband Harold started it decades ago. No matter how busy life became, we gathered once a week to share a meal. After Harold passed away, I kept the tradition alive. I thought it kept the family close. Looking back now, I wonder if it only made me easier to study. That afternoon smelled like roasted chicken, fresh bread, and lemon pie cooling on the counter. Sunlight filled the dining room while my grandchildren laughed about something at the far end of the table. On the surface, everything looked perfectly normal. But something felt off. My son Daniel sat across from me, cutting his chicken with careful precision. His wife Lauren kept glancing at me in a way I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't rude exactly, just watchful. Too watchful. Their teenage daughter Emily kept her phone on the table, angled strangely toward me. And their youngest boy Jacob sat quietly for once, which was unusual for a 10-year-old who normally couldn't sit still for 5 minutes. I brushed the feeling aside. Maybe I was just imagining things. Then my phone buzzed beside my plate. I glanced down. Unknown number. The message read, "Do not react, they're recording you." For a moment, I assumed it was a mistake. But as I slowly lifted my eyes, my stomach tightened. Daniel wasn't looking at me anymore. Lauren was smiling, but the smile looked rehearsed. Emily's phone lens pointed directly toward my side of the table. My pulse started pounding. I forced myself to take another bite of food, pretending nothing had happened. The message echoed in my mind. They're recording you. Why would my own family record me? Before I could think any further, my phone vibrated again. Another message appeared. And what it said made my heart skip a beat. Because whoever was texting me seemed to know exactly what my family was planning. And it was something far worse than I could have imagined. But the next message revealed something even more disturbing. My phone buzzed again beneath the table. I carefully lifted it just enough to read the screen. Another message from the unknown number. They're trying to provoke you. My throat tightened. Provoke me. Why? I forced myself to keep eating while my mind raced. Across the table, Daniel cleared his throat. "So, Mom," he said casually, "have you been remembering to take your medications?" The question caught me off guard. Yes, of course," I replied. Lauren leaned forward sympathetically. "You know, sometimes people forget things as they get older. It happens to everyone." Something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. I planned. My phone buzzed again. They want you to lose your temper. I suddenly remembered several strange moments from the past few months. Daniel insisting I'd told the same story 3 times. Lauren asking if I'd been forgetting appointments. Little comments that seemed harmless at the time. But now, they felt like pieces of something larger. Another message arrived. They're building evidence. Evidence. The word made my stomach drop. Evidence of what? Then came the message that changed everything. They want guardianship. I nearly dropped my fork. Guardianship meant a court could declare me incapable of managing my own life. If that happened, someone else would control my finances, my house, my medical decisions, of everything. And there was only one person who would benefit from that. My son. Daniel's construction company had been struggling lately. I'd overheard whispers about debts and loans. If I were declared mentally incompetent, he would become my legal guardian, and everything I owned would fall under his control. My late husband Harold and I spent 45 years building a comfortable life. A house, a savings, investments. Nothing extravagant, but enough to live peacefully. Enough to tempt someone desperate. Another message appeared on my phone. Stay calm, they need you to react. I slowly looked around the table. Emily's phone was still aimed toward me. Lauren watched every movement I made. And Daniel looked almost eager. Like he was waiting for something to happen. Waiting for me to snap. But what they didn't know was that someone had just warned me. And now I was watching them just as carefully. Still, one question kept echoing in my mind. Who was the stranger trying to protect me, and how did they know so much about my family? Lunch ended shortly afterward. Daniel stepped outside to take a phone call while Lauren cleared the dishes. I excused myself and walked quietly to the bathroom. Once inside, I locked the door. My hands trembled as I typed a message back. "And who is this?" The reply came almost instantly. "Someone who works at the law office your son hired." My heart nearly stopped. The stranger explained that Daniel had contacted their firm weeks earlier. He was preparing paperwork for something called a guardianship petition. That meant he planned to ask a judge to declare me mentally incapable of managing my own life. But that wasn't the worst part. The stranger said Daniel had been collecting evidence. Video recordings. Witness statements. Stories describing my supposed confusion. My stomach twisted. "He says you're showing signs of cognitive decline," the message continued. A cognitive decline. A polite way of saying dementia. I leaned against the sink, staring at my reflection in the mirror. And I felt perfectly healthy. Sharp even. I balanced my checkbook every month. Managed my investments. Volunteered at the library. Yet my own son was quietly building a legal case, claiming I couldn't take care of myself. Another message appeared. "Something about the case feels wrong." The stranger explained they had noticed several recordings that looked staged. Moments where someone seemed to provoke me before filming. Situations that felt deliberately arranged. That's why they decided to warn me. "Your son plans to file the petition in 3 weeks," the stranger wrote. 3 weeks. 21 days. That was all the time I had before a judge might start deciding my future. The message continued. "You need proof before the hearing." Proof. Proof that Daniel was manipulating the situation. Proof that I was mentally capable. Proof that the entire case was built on lies. And I took a deep breath. For nearly 70 years, I had trusted my family completely. But now I realized something painful. Someone I loved had quietly started a war. And if I didn't fight back, I might lose everything Harold and I had built together. But what I didn't realize yet was that Daniel had already taken the next step in his plan. A step that could destroy my life long before any courtroom hearing. Over the next few days, I paid attention. Really paid attention. And once I started looking carefully, the traps became impossible to ignore. Lauren called me 3 times in one day, asking about bills I had already paid. Daniel asked strange questions about whether I had trouble remembering names. Emily suddenly started recording family gatherings for her social media projects. At first glance, none of it seemed suspicious. But now I could see the pattern. They were trying to capture small mistakes, tiny moments that could be twisted into evidence. Evidence that I was losing my mind. The stranger eventually introduced herself. Her name was Rachel. She worked as a legal assistant at the firm Daniel had hired. Rachel quietly began sending me copies of documents from the case file. Reading them felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Statements describing me as increasingly forgetful. Claims that I had become confused about finances. Even suggestions that I might be unsafe living alone. None of it was true. But on paper, it looked convincing. One document listed video clips Daniel planned to present in court. Another mentioned witness testimony from Lauren. They had been planning this for months. Rachel included a short note with the documents. If the judge believes these claims, Daniel could gain temporary guardianship immediately. Temporary guardianship meant he could control my money before the final hearing. That terrified me more than anything else. Because once someone gained control of your finances, getting them back could take years. I realized something then. Daniel believed I was weak. He believed age had made me easy to manipulate. But he forgot something important. I had survived nearly 7 decades of life. A marriage. A loss. Raising children. Running a household. People like Daniel often underestimate older women. And that mistake was about to become very expensive for him. Still, exposing his plan wouldn't be easy. Because Daniel wasn't just preparing a courtroom battle. He was planning something much more immediate. Something that could force me out of my own home before the hearing even began. And Rachel's next message confirmed my worst fear. 3 days later, Rachel sent a message that made my heart race. Your son visited your bank today. Apparently, Daniel had been asking questions about my accounts. Not withdrawing money yet, but asking about procedures, requirements, authorization forms. Rachel believed he was preparing to move quickly once temporary guardianship was granted, which meant I needed to act before he did. For the first time in my life, I scheduled a meeting with my own attorney. Her name was Margaret Caldwell, and she had practiced elder law for nearly 30 years. When I explained the situation, Margaret listened quietly. I showed her the messages, the documents Rachel had sent, the notes I had begun keeping about Daniel's behavior. Margaret leaned back in her chair. Then she said something unexpected. "Your son thinks you're an easy target." She tapped the papers thoughtfully. "Let's prove him wrong." Margaret explained that Daniel's case relied on one key idea: that I was mentally unstable. If we could prove he deliberately manipulated evidence, the entire petition would collapse. But Margaret suggested something even more strategic. "Let him keep collecting recordings," she said. "If he believes you're losing control, he'll become careless. Careless people make mistakes, and mistakes leave evidence." Margaret proposed a risky plan. I would continue attending family gatherings, continue behaving normally, but occasionally I would pretend to forget small things. Nothing dramatic, just enough to encourage Daniel, just enough to make him believe his plan was working. Meanwhile, Margaret and Rachel would gather real evidence. Emails, documents, anything revealing Daniel's manipulation. The plan made me uneasy. Pretending to lose my memory felt frightening. But Margaret looked at me seriously. "Your son is already playing a role," she said. "And now it's your turn." So I agreed. But what none of us expected was just how far Daniel was willing to go to win. And the next trap he set nearly destroyed everything. The following 2 weeks felt like acting in a play. At family dinners, I occasionally asked Daniel to repeat something. Once I forgot where I parked my car. Another time, I mixed up the day of a doctor's appointment. Each small mistake seemed to excite Daniel. He recorded everything. Lauren began speaking to me in overly gentle tones. Emily filmed more family moments. Rachel confirmed Daniel had officially filed the guardianship petition. The hearing date was set. At 3 weeks, just like she predicted. But Rachel also discovered something shocking. Emails between Daniel and his lawyer. Messages discussing ways to provoke emotional reactions. Instructions about staging situations. Even suggestions about how to frame certain video clips. In other words, proof the entire case was manufactured. Margaret smiled when she read the emails. "This will destroy his credibility," she said. But she warned me about something else. Daniel might attempt an emergency petition before the hearing, claiming I had suddenly become dangerous or unstable. If that happened, a judge could temporarily remove control of my finances immediately, which meant we needed one final piece of evidence. Proof that Daniel's manipulation was intentional. Proof so clear that no judge could ignore it. Margaret believed Daniel would reveal that proof himself. So all we had to do was let him think he had already won. And the day of the hearing was approaching faster than any of us expected. But Daniel had no idea the trap waiting for him inside that courtroom. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. Daniel arrived looking confident. Lauren sat beside him nervously, clutching a folder of documents. I took my seat quietly next to Margaret. When the hearing began, Daniel's lawyer presented their evidence. Video clips of me appearing forgetful. Moments where I asked repeated questions. Scenes carefully chosen to make me look confused. Daniel watched the judge eagerly, certain he was winning. Then Margaret stood. First, she presented my medical evaluations. Multiple doctors confirming my mental health was perfectly sound. Then she showed my financial records. Years of organized accounts and responsible investments. Daniel's smile began fading. But the real blow came next. Margaret handed the judge printed copies of Daniel's emails. Messages discussing how to provoke emotional reactions, how to edit recordings, how to frame situations to make me appear unstable. The courtroom went silent. The judge read the email slowly. Daniel's face turned pale. Within minutes, the entire case collapsed. Not only was the guardianship denied, the judge ordered an investigation into possible elder exploitation. Daniel stared at me in shock. For weeks, he believed he was the smartest person in the room. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. He wasn't the only one collecting evidence. Still, the most emotional moment of that day hadn't happened yet. Because when the hearing ended, Daniel approached me in the hallway. And the question he asked next caught me completely off guard. The hallway outside the courtroom felt strangely quiet. Daniel walked toward me slowly. For the first time in weeks, he looked uncertain, almost frightened. "Mom," he said quietly, "how did you know?" I studied his face. The same boy I once held in my arms. The same child I helped with homework and soccer practice. Somewhere along the way, that boy had turned into someone willing to betray his own mother. "Someone warned me," I replied calmly. Daniel frowned. "Who?" I shook my head. "That doesn't matter." What mattered was something else entirely. I looked him straight in the eyes. "For weeks you treated me like I was helpless," I said. "You forgot something important." Daniel waited. Growing older doesn't mean becoming powerless. For nearly 70 years, I had faced challenges. And this was simply another one. The investigation that followed the hearing took months. Daniel avoided serious charges, but the court permanently denied his guardianship request. Our relationship, however, never fully recovered. Trust, once broken, is difficult to repair. Even now, years later, I still think about that first message during Sunday lunch. The warning that changed everything. Because if I had reacted the way Daniel expected, if I had shouted or panicked, his plan might have worked, and I might have lost everything. Sometimes justice arrives quietly, not with anger or revenge, but with patience, and a reminder that wisdom often comes with age. Still, one mystery remains unsolved. I never met Rachel in person. After the trial ended, she simply stopped messaging. But every now and then's, when my phone buzzes unexpectedly, I can't help wondering if someone, somewhere, is still watching out for me, and if another message might arrive someday, right when I need it most.